Good morning, and welcome to the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting for December 19th, 2017. Today, we're going to start off. Lee had a question about end-to-end tests. So why don't you repeat that for the recording?
Sure thing. Yeah, I was trying to work on my on the ticket for etcdtls yesterday, got things to a good point, and now I'm really struggling to get a full multi-node cluster up so that I can run the end-to-end tests for kubeadm cluster creation. And it looks like there's an issue that and a pull request related to some of the documentation around how to hack that together. Yesterday, I played with Mirantis's work using the Docker and Docker clusters, and that seems to work okay, but I'm struggling, and so I'm curious how other people do this and what we can do to help document it better.
Okay, so the short answer I'll give, Jacob Beecham, a couple of months back, did like a 3-part tutorial on how our EDE infrastructure is configured. So like how you can configure prow and the different sort of runners and the pull request builders and so forth to run our tests either on a schedule or elsewise. And I think as part of that, he talked about how to run the tests themselves. Obviously, as a Googler who has easy access to GCP, I think it was pretty GCP specific, and that's how we tend to test because we aren't getting a bill for that directly. So it's pretty convenient for us. So I think there are some instructions on how to use Kubernetes Anywhere to launch kubeadm clusters to do end-to-end testing the same way that we do it on pull requests. So if that is available to you, that should work. But there's no reason it shouldn't work in the other environments. And if you've got it working manually or in the Docker and Docker environment, and it seems to work pretty well, then you can get the code checked in and add additional EDE tests that will get run on like the 30-minute schedule to build further confidence in the feature. Because you're probably not going to run the test 100 times before committing your code, but once it gets committed, then it will just run continuously.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I'll need to evaluate if this is something that can work in a CI environment reliably. Because currently I have like a couple different clusters like on my computer, and it's kind of becoming a mess.
Which part are you worried about not working in a CI environment? Is there anything in particular?
It's just trying to really, I don't know if I'm concerned about the viability of it working. It's just more that I need to iron out what it looks like to actually have an end-to-end workflow that's consistent.
Yeah, I saw there was a pull request a couple of days ago to make some of our EDEs less flaky, which is also another issue. Like a lot of times if you write a test and run it locally, it works just fine, and then you check it in and it doesn't work 100% of the time, which then starts to file issues against us, which is frustrating. So if there does seem like it doesn't work consistently, then we should try to think about how we can write the test so that it will work consistently. Cool. All right, so I would search for those videos. I believe that Jacob recorded them and posted them. If anybody happens to have a link or can find one farther down in the Lifecycle meeting notes that we can share with Lee, that'd be really great. I don't know if they made it onto the YouTube playlist for our SIG, but we do have a playlist where all of the SIG recordings get posted, and so that might be another place to look for them. Let's see. Let's do Fabrizio's next, because most of mine are sort of carryover from last week and not as important. So Fabrizio, you had a quick poll on how to proceed with the pull request here. Can you give us a little background?
Yes, so it is really a quick question on a PR, which I'm reviewing. The PR, this PR focus on a behavior of kubeadmin that now silently use the IP of the machine when a DNS name is provided, which is not that sometimes is something that sometimes confuses users. And the quick, easy way to fix this is to give a warning. But I'm not sure this is the proper way, because if I give a warning, but I have used the IP, the user didn't get what he asked for. So I think that we should consider at least two other alternatives, which are blocking. So don't accept the DNS name during the validation, the parameter validation, or handle DNS name properly, which can be useful for HA, for instance. I think that, in my opinion, we should go for free, even if there are some points that should be addressed, like, for instance, how to detect EP4 or EP6 when a DNS name is used, because now EP4 or EP6 is derived from the adversary, from the IP, from the address of the adversary's address. So if this should be a problem. And
I have a quick
please.
question. So the advertised address is the IP interface that we bind the API server to, right?
Yes.
So in your mind, what does it mean if you pass a name in for that? Because you can't bind to a name, right? The IP interface on your machine doesn't have a name. It just has an address.
Yes. I think that if we stay with this, we simply have to block. Don't accept DNS names during validation. And for me, it is a clean solution. That means then that if someone wants to use a load balancer or something else in front of, can use the additional certificate names.
Yeah, and I think they'll have to do that anyway.
Yeah, that's a good thing, I think.
Okay, so I will answer the contributor to go for 2 instead of 1, which was the original proposal. That's it. Good for me.
Yeah, I think number 2 makes a lot of sense to me. You can always override it with the force option, I believe. And if not, we should allow you to override that with the force option. And the DNS name thing seems a little wonky to me, because if you pass in a DNS name, it's not, I think it's going to be unintuitive sort of what happens behind that. And this is really a flag for the API server itself, not really a kubeadm flag. We should just sort of pass it through. And so I think as we move to component config, this will just become a field for the API server. And if we are doing something tricky with DNS names, then that won't map directly, and we'll have to, maintain a whole bunch of tricky code going forward.
Okay, fine for me. We go for 2.
Also, worth pointing. Regarding IPv6 support, is whether we should have it like this implicitly after going to beta as well, or if we should have some specific enable IPv6 mode. Right now, we just tell it implicitly by seeing the advertised address with API server, but we might, as it touches a lot of different places, like everything from kubeproxy to kubeDNS, so it's probably something that could make sense in a cluster API, cluster control plane, or like that has the whole view.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with IPv6, as my understanding is right now, it's an all or nothing, right? We don't have dual stack support where you can have a mixed cluster. So if you do want to advertise your API server over maybe IPv6 and IPv4, right, where it could maybe bind to both, and maybe externally you're addressing it via IPv6, that could end up toggling your entire cluster over to IPv6, which might not be exactly what you want. I don't think keying off that to make the global decision makes a lot of sense.
So just reading through the flags, there is a distinction between the bind address IP and the advertised address IP. It seems like the advertised address is used to tell the members of the cluster how to reach or how to route to the API server. This is by default equal to the bind address IP, which is a separate flag. That is the definition of what interfaces to listen on. So for instance, you could set bind address IP to 0s, but then specify what to advertise to the rest of the cluster. And we might want to maybe separate the configuration of these if you wanted to support what Rob was saying.
guess that also implies that we expect cluster components and end users to reach the cluster over the same IP, right? Like I could imagine a scenario where maybe you have private IPs for all of your cluster components. So your kube proxies and your kubelets are all talking over a 10 dot address, but you then additionally want to expose an external IP for kubectl.
It's good, right?
And it sounds like that is a bit tricky to configure at this point.
Yeah. Does their command line? The command line doesn't use the API, right? The API is separate. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't.
We're getting some background noise. I think it's Keith, but I can't figure out how to mute. Let's see. All right. Okay, so I think we're okay going forward with number 2 for now. I think the other good thing about number 2 is we can always extend the functionality later if we'd like to expand it to number 3, but this at least gets a fix in for now that will block people from shooting themselves in the foot.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good to me.
So last week I put on the agenda to have sort of a retrospective about KubeCon, and I wasn't able to attend for that part of the meeting. I think there was a little bit of discussion about focusing on membership and getting more people involved. I didn't know if there were any specific takeaways that people had that we should talk about as a group. I know I filled out my KubeCon survey last night and put some notes in there about how this year to me felt a lot less focused on SIGs and sort of building SIG communities. And that was something that I missed from the year before, where I felt like we had a lot more sort of time as a SIG to sit down and do SIG planning and talk about future direction. And that might be just because last year we had a whole day to sit down just as a SIG to do that. Maybe that was just separate from the conference. But I don't know if there were any other takeaways that maybe we should try to plan things differently for the next KubeCon, or if there were different sort of sessions that people wished that SIG Cluster Lifecycle had put forward that we should think about proposing for the next one. Does anybody have thoughts?
One of the things I've really liked from the OpenStack summits I've attended is that they have like sub-team onboarding days as like a separate part of the conference to do that kind of planning and I guess new participant onboarding separate from the conference. So there's like days dedicated to that, which is something we may want to consider given our size. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's maybe what I'm thinking of, because last year when it was in Seattle, we had a full day before the conference started. It was just a cluster lifecycle where we sat in a room for 5 or 6 hours and we did a bunch of whiteboarding and talked about planning, and that's sort of along the lines of what you're saying, and that was really nice. We did not do that in Austin this year. I was maybe misguidedly thinking that we'd have a chance at the conference to meet, but it's not going to be the same if you don't have a long block of time. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I raised the issue on the mailing list some time ago, but I think the conclusion was that people weren't in town by like Monday morning, not enough at least. So, but generally planning for a whole day, like from the KubeCon organizers' point of view, it could be a good thing to like, okay, we have the conference is 3 days, and then we have 1 day maybe for the contributor or leadership summit. We have 1 day for onboarding, and it's of course optional to attend, but at least informally for a lot of SIGs, not just SIG Cluster Lifecycle, or the one that happens to have an office nearby. I mean, we were in Seattle last time, so then Robert could host us in the Google office. But it's, well, it depends on the SIG then again, who has access to space and where. So maybe we could raise it to an organizer level that it could make sense to have some kind of informal meetup for more SIGs.
Yeah, I guess so we did the contributor summit the day before the conference. If we push that forward 1 day, and assumed that most people going to the contributor summit were also going to be involved in sort of the SIG onboarding day. And we did the SIG onboarding day right before the conference started. That would allow people that were not part of the contributor summit to just come one day earlier for the conference and be sort of part of the SIG process. I think that schedule might make a lot of sense, right? You know, like you said, like I wasn't in Austin Monday morning, but I could have been if we had the schedule arranged differently or if we planned far enough ahead for the SIG meetup. But I think if we did a SIG meetup on Monday, then people who weren't part of the contributor summit would have just had this empty day in their schedule, which would have been a bit awkward. So yeah, I can go talk to Paris and see. It might be too late for Copenhagen, but certainly for next December, when conveniently we're back in Seattle and I have an office here, and Joe also has an office here, that we can definitely try to get that on the schedule.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. Any other wrap-up items from KubeCon? I'll point out that I met a lot of people in person, which was awesome. I don't think I attended very many talks this year, but it was great to see a lot of people there in person. It was great to meet a lot of new people. It was great to see a lot of the interest that we had in our SIG. I added both Lucas and my talks to our YouTube playlist for SIG Cluster Lifecycle last night. Unfortunately, the SIG update was not recorded. So we had like an overflowing room full of people. They gave us a really small space for that, which was also kind of unfortunate. And they didn't record it. So we can't post that, but it was, the slides are available if people are interested in the topics that were presented there.
I just mentioned that something the OpenStack Summit would do was they would have a developer track and let's call it non-developer track. Basically because of exactly what you just said, where the developers would typically not go to most of the talks anyway. So then you have, 3 days for scheduling whatever we want to schedule. Because they would do like SIG meetups, they would do like planning sessions, they would do like deep dives on features, that sort of thing.
So one thing I'd love to get folks' feedback on, and I was talking to some of the CNCF folks, is that there were about 4,000 people at KubeCon Austin. The Seattle Convention Center holds up to 8,000. As KubeCon grows and as the audience changes, is it going to actually be the right place for folks to get together and meet? Do you think that KubeCon is the right place for that, or should we try and find other ways to get people together for face-to-face, and having more of a, like, one of the things that I think might be interesting is to have a very open, Kubernetes community conference, which is focused at people actually helping build the thing, and then have a more outward-facing business case KubeCon. But I mean, it's not my decision, but I'd love to get feedback from folks.
That makes sense to me, Joe. I think that there are issues with the fact that when we try to have like SIG F2F set, let's say in Austin, let's say, right, there are some sort of budget related constraints and such things, like because like these are the rooms that we have, that these are the rooms we can use, and it's kind of hard. So if we were to consider the contributor summit as a separate event, which is doesn't have to happen at the same convention center, and doesn't have to happen in the same city as KubeCon. So that would make sense to me, I think, in that respect.
I mean, obviously there's some downsides to that. I know for me personally, I'm torn because I have responsibilities both on sort of the business side, and then also, responsibilities to the community. And I think there's a lot of other folks that were in the same boat. And so I wasn't able to go to as many of the community talks, or, I was luckily able to attend a lot of the contributor summit, but I know that like there was a CNCF governing board meeting that day, right? So there was a lot of folks who had to miss the summit for that.
Yeah, so given that sort of perspective, Joe, would what Justin proposed be sort of intractable for someone like you, where if we had multiple tracks during KubeCon, so like in Seattle, if we have 8,000 attendees and we say, maybe 300 of those people are on sort of this developer track where we're having lots of SIG meetups, we're having sort of breakout sessions, we have maybe more inwardly focused talks even, and then we have a bunch of sort of outwardly facing things for the other 7,500 attendees. Would it be too difficult to sort of split time and focus on both those during the same week? And would it be better over multiple?
It'd be really hard for me, at least personally, because I spent
a lot of time doing like podcasts and like, you know, meeting with other companies because they were there, or, you know, meeting with candidates I was trying to recruit, right? So there's, you know, I think, you know, I'm just like torn in every direction at these things. And so the community stuff tends to fall by the wayside, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Also, for me personally, though.
Yeah. The thing also is, like, to some extent, we already had this like split. Myself, I didn't even go to a normal talk, I think, maybe one, and then focused most of my time on like meeting people from the SIG and things like that. And also talking. That is also like, for me, it is non-trivial to, well, go to Austin like just like that, right? And for many people. So if we do split the conferences or whatever, then we also need to consider all the things with, like, how do we get people there that wouldn't be able to come otherwise? Now, like, I'm speaking at KubeCon, also the business conference, so that gave me a ticket to the contributor summit as well, and things like that. So yeah, it's
the big downside there is travel. Is, you know,
yeah,
when folks are coming from far away, they don't want to have to travel twice. I don't know. I just like I don't know how to fit it all into 1 week without, you know, where there's both sides of the coin, both the inward facing stuff, but also the outward facing stuff. So yeah.
Jason mentioned it.
I don't have a silver bullet here.
Jason mentioned in chat that giving end users access to engineers is good value too. But I worry that if we split things completely separately, many of the engineers aren't going to go to the you know, outwardly facing one unless they're giving talks, and we're going to, you know, send all those people to the community event because travel budgets and so forth. You're going to have to pick maybe one or the other to go to. And that's the other value of having them together, is it sort of does get a lot of the engineers together in the same place. So I don't know if there's a great answer, but we should definitely go back to Paris and George and try to figure out sort of how to, maybe they're not in charge. I guess maybe there are sort of community representatives to KubeCon.
Well, I can tell you that the contributor summit this time landed hard. I think it makes sense for us to take it seriously and plan it further in the future, make sure people know the dates, get the attendance list sort of figured out in terms of what space we can do, how many people can actually attend. The way the attendance list was chosen this time around I wasn't happy with it. I don't think anybody was super happy with it. And it just was all, you know, honestly, a bit of an afterthought, which I don't think is, which I think showed really. So I think that's one of those things that we want to make sure we get down this time.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with those characterizations. I mean, also, if we're trying to do an unconference, there's only so much planning you're really supposed to do up front.
So I don't know, Caleb. I mean, I was talking to George in Paris, and, you know, there was rank confusion in terms of what was going on, who was invited. It all ended very, very late. There were things like, you know, the presentations and who was presenting in the SIG updates that weren't widely vetted, and so there were surprises across that. I think there was definitely room for a lot more planning going into this conference. It's you know, that's my take on it. I don't know if others would agree.
I mean, I definitely guess I'm not trying to push back on your opinion. It's just that if we're trying to have an unconference style event there, I think certainly there's only so much planning one does before an event like that. And maybe the unconference style is not the ideal format for all of the meetings. I would imagine like SIG updates maybe don't an unconference style, but certainly I was in sessions that I definitely found value in, even with the, you know, with the level of planning I found it appropriate, at least for the sessions I was in largely, but that's just my personal experience. I did see them doing, both Paris and George doing a lot of planning work ahead of time. So I don't know if I would characterize it as a lack of planning on either of their parts.
It landed very hard.
I'd love to try, like, I think one of the things we can do is we can try things, right? Like we have all these SIGs, we can try different things in different SIGs. I'd love to try like a 24-hour online hackathon type thing, right? Or online meetathon, right? Where it's 24 hours, most people are not going to attend all 24 hours we expect, so there's no like time zone preference. There's no travel requirement. It's like hop in, hop out, do what you want, break off, that sort of thing. I think would be cool. And obviously it's a lot of work to like set up the infrastructure for that, but I think it'd be fun also to try that and see what happens. And it might be a great way to get more involvement with people that for whatever reason wouldn't otherwise join.
And that sort of event could be completely divorced from like a gathering. Like you said, there's no travel involved. All right. Well, I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next topic. Again, I think I have the rest of the agenda here. So if somebody has something they want to talk about, please add it in. I don't think this was covered last week, but we started sort of the KEP process. So this is the Kubernetes enhancement proposal process with Jace maybe a month ago or so. We went through and filled out one as a group. During the cluster API breakout meeting, we filled out another one for that effort. But we probably need more than sort of 2 KEPs to be tracking as a SIG if you think about the scope that they're supposed to have. There's a lot of scope for the SIG. And if we want to break that down into somewhat manageable chunks and talk about what we're going to do for 1.10, I think we need to put some more effort in there. So we talked during the meeting about the fact that doing those as a group was somewhat slow and laborious. And we should take it offline. I haven't had time to do it offline, and I don't think anybody else has either. But we should maybe try to set the goal of, I guess the next meeting is January 2nd. And there's a lot of holidays between now and then. But we are sort of already into the 1.10 development cycle. So I think we should set the goal of having January 2nd be a day that we can review KEPs, and hopefully people can find some time between now and then to write some for us to review. If we don't have any, we won't have anything to review. But ideally, we'd have some to go through and use that as sort of the driving for what we expect to finish during 1.10. And I know people have already started sending PRs, to update kubeadm through, following Luke's guide of what we do for each release to add new support and drop old support. But it would be nice if we could come to a consensus on what we're working on and try to use the new format for that.
So now, are you thinking, Robbie, that this is just for cluster lifecycle, internal facing stuff? So it's just a way to organize efforts in the SIG? Because I think there's this dual purpose for KEPs for both organizing stuff happening within a SIG, but then also as a tool to actually communicate and organize cross SIG too. But most of this stuff is really just within a SIG, right?
Well, I think we should, the KEP that we wrote first was about kubeadm and trying to get self-hosting going, which is an external facing feature that other people might want to follow along with.
I guess what I mean is, like, is it a feature that's going to require like lots of coordination between SIGs?
Well, in the past, that feature actually has, right? We've been working with Tim's been working really hard with the Node team to get checkpointing working. We've been talking a lot to SIG apps to get the surge update going, which didn't get off the ground, but it did actually have dependencies on other SIGs in that specific case. I think the goal with the KEPs was both to try out the new process and see how it worked for us, and try to replace our old process of having a Google Doc and just kind of chatting about it during a meeting and not ever really going back and updating that throughout the the release cycle. And so I guess I'm hoping that we can use the KEPs both for inwardly and externally facing features, and maybe do a better job keeping them up to date throughout the life cycle of a feature, which tends to last more than one release.
Awesome. Yeah, because I'm working on reorganizing some of the. I'm creating a KEP directory. We talked about this at SIG architecture this week. I'm creating a KEP directory at the root of the community repo, and I'm going to try and build some low grade tooling around that so that we can start creating some value out of that process that stretches across things. So awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's the main benefit, right? For what we were doing before, this is a little bit of extra process compared to what we had before. But I think that if that extra process is standardized across SIGs, and we can use it to track multi-release features with some tooling, that's going to actually give us more bang for the buck than what we had before.
All right. Well, any feedback there is appreciated.
I'll try out the KEP process with the upgrade proposal, which is still a PR. I think I've written it fully now on my way back from Austin, but I mean, it makes no sense to merge it now after it being, pending for the final synthesis for some months and the feature implemented many months ago. So I'll instead just convert it to a KEP directly and merge from there.
I guess the other thing, if people want to contribute but they don't feel like they can maybe write a KEP, is they can go through the doc of ones that other people are writing and turn those into PRs. Right, that would be another way to help. Is to just get those into PRs and send them off towards Joe maybe to make sure they're in the right format to get them merged in the community repo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, converting, like, for example, the Bootstrap token doc to a KEP would also be like useful. As far as I know, we don't envision any large changes there either, so it should be mostly copy and paste and add some metadata. Okay, I think we're all set there.
All right, so next was the Wednesday morning. So Wednesday morning we have a breakout meeting. It's at the same time as this meeting, but a day later. That to date has been largely focused on kubeadm, and in particular building self-hosting and building HA, and doing sort of deeper dives into the kubeadm design and direction. During KubeCon, Lucas had proposed that maybe we want to switch that into office hours. And instead of doing deep dives into design of kubeadm, instead we open that up for people to come and ask questions and try to use that as a time slot to help onboard new contributors to the SIG. So I wanted to talk about whether people thought that was a good idea. If people like the existing, it's going to be optional either way. Like if you want to be a member of the SIG, like this is not like you're required to show up for another meeting. But would it be more useful to people to have that be sort of a more open-ended discussion about anything related to the SIG versus being focused on design and implementation for kubeadm?
Worth mentioning is probably that KOPS has these two. I guess you were about to say that, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the KOPS has one, and we fill the time with KOP. We have an hour every other week, and we fill the time with KOP stuff. I suspect that you will fill the time with kubeadm stuff, and that to me seems like a great place to start and set expectations.
So you're proposing we make it kubeadm office hours as opposed to cluster lifecycle office hours? That would also be awesome.
That makes sense.
If you want to, you can alternate weeks or something and try that for a little while and see if there is anything in the SIG office hours that is not kubeadm, right?
So I've been helping Joe with the office hours for just general audience of Kubernetes. So the one I participated in is the European one. And that's like, I think every month right now. And, a lot of people turned out, definitely. So, I think there's great value for the users to have this, dedicated slot to where they can ask their burning question. And obviously, in this context, some of this would be more contributor-oriented and not so much end-user open-ended type questions, but like, oh, I want to fix this bug. How do I do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this would be mostly a like rebrand or a bit of repurposing as well, but mostly like sending a clearer message to our contributors, maybe some users as well if they have questions about like whatever. But mostly like say use the word office hours as a more standardized across Kubernetes term than like implementation meeting, right? Because, well, to someone that is new to the community, there might be a huge difference, although we try to cover basically the same things. But yeah, also emphasizing more that you have a good chance to come bring your questions here about how to like get this PR merged or whatever, like making it lower the barrier to actually like pinging us again. Like, for example, a reviewer hasn't answered your PR in a month because it was like it got lost in the GitHub flood. Then you can easily, it should be a low barrier to come there and say, hey, can you take a look at this and what do you think? So yeah, that was the sort we discussed during KubeCon.
So I've heard a lot of this sounds like a good idea from people. Are there any dissenting voices on the call that think we should keep it as it is today?
For me, it makes sense to change it in something that can help people. Sometimes it is difficult to understand where to find binaries and so on, and having a place to ask someone is useful.
Yeah, cool. Then I'll add that to the SIG roadmap planning, and Robert and myself probably can like help with the renaming or whatever in our docs.
Yeah, and I'll change the calendar invite also, which also brings up the question. I think, Justin, you have a couple of sort of SIG-ish calendar invites as well, like the kubeadm adoption working group and the COPS office hours. Do you want to sort of promote those onto the SIG calendar? Or are you happy having those separate?
I will do that. That is a great idea. Thank you. I actually don't know who actually owns that calendar, so it's a little tricky, but I will do that.
Okay. I think I gave Lucas right access to it. Luke Marston created the calendar and gave me right access. So I can probably just add you to the ACL. That might be the easiest way to do it. And you might have to, I don't know if you can just move it over if you have to create a new event or whatever, but either way, it shouldn't be too difficult.
Yeah, also another thing, which is that the kubeadm adoption working group has been suspended for a month or so, maybe a month and a half. I won't personally have time to drive a third meeting or so, well, now from next year, I won't have time to drive any meetings, unfortunately, but that is one extra I can't at least even attend. So I mean, it's fair to say that we just will wrap it inside of the kubeadm office hours or something like that.
I think we identified a bunch of things that would be helpful, but I think the big thing that would be most helpful for kubeadm adoption is if Kubernetes ships some difficult to install feature. Like, in other words, if there's a big carrot to using kubeadm for something, then everyone will be like, oh, we want to use kubeadm because it gets us this for free, right? That will be the actual forcing function for using kubeadm more than thou shalt use kubeadm, I think.
And I think that gradually becomes the case, I guess, as we adopt the features. For example, like component config, as we push SIGs towards that, and also like dynamic kubelet config, which hopefully makes BDAM 110, which is going to be a huge improvement, but has some effort to actually, how should we say, set up and configure. So eventually, yeah.
So I'll move the COPS office hours under the SIG cluster lifecycle umbrella, and I will suspend or integrate the kubeadm adoption group into the kubeadm office hours, which then means if you want the 10 a.m.s or the whatever the other slot is, the hour later slot, you can have that slot.
You mean the slot right after this meeting?
Yes, but tomorrow. Oh, yes, sorry. This slot right after the meeting today, yes.
Yeah, so it's the 10 a.m. slot on Tuesdays. So I guess that's another question. If we're going to do office hours, would people prefer it to be right after this meeting, so you get kind of a long block one day a week, or to split it up and leave it where it is on Wednesdays? I think the default is going to be to leave it where it is, unless people have strong opinions that we want to move it. But that's a good point. We should throw that out there and see if it makes more sense for people's schedules to do it in one chunk.
Yeah, I think that would be a good mailing list topic.
Okay, well, let's leave it where it is for now. We can send out something to the email list and see if it makes more sense to scooch it over. I don't know. I mean, either one is going to overlap with other SIGs. Like, if people are going to try to come to our office hours from other SIGs, both slots are going to have some overlap and make some people unavailable. I don't know which one would be worse. All right, so next on the agenda, I had a planning retrospective from 1.9. So I just wanted to go back and look at, 1.9 shipped last week. Yay. We got everything done. Look at sort of what we had talked about doing for 1.9 and where we ended up. I think, every time we do planning sessions, there's a lot of stuff that we'd like to do, a small number of things that we actually get done. And maybe sort of fold that in with what we talked about earlier with KEPs and try to be realistic, especially as Joe mentioned, part of the purpose of KEPs is that other SIGs can look at what you're working on and plan around your timelines. And so if you say we're going to do X by 1.10, and really that happens in 1.12 because things are going much slower, that may actually affect the schedule for other teams. Because if they're assuming you're going to get something done, that's going to slip their schedule too. So, I think that we just need to be as realistic as we can about what we're going to be able to get done during each release cycle. Make sure that when we sign up for things, especially if they're externally facing to other developers, that we are realistic with our timeframes. So looking at the planning doc, we had a P0 for getting testing done for kubeadm. It seems like it's in place. So this was implementing automatic upgrade testing. I believe we have automatic upgrade testing now.
Yeah, we do.
Excellent.
One thing that we yet want to add is automated downgrade testing to eventually move the dependencies out of Google with their own bash scripts that I don't know personally, at least, how they work, but rebasing that on top of kubeadm is a lot better because you could just I ran a lot of downgrade testing on my laptop. So it was just a kubeadm upgrade command, nothing more special. So that will democratize, or may lower the barrier to start doing both upgrade and downgrade testing for people. I think, that's a 1.10 item. Let's leave it out for now.
Cool. So next was self-hosting as a default. So back in the middle of November, we said it was at risk for 1.9. It ended up being at risk because it didn't make it for 1.9. And I think, Lucas, correct me if I'm wrong, we still have it marked as alpha in 1.9, and it's not the default, right?
Yeah, so what we started thinking about and what we should debate a lot during these meetings now is that how far should we extend kubeadm scope beyond this point? And if we're not aiming for this kubeadm init and join -- master experience, we might not even want to enable self-hosting by default. So virtually everything should be done for self-hosting as is right now. And the pieces are there. We just didn't graduate to beta as we didn't see any extra value in it, actually, for now. And we hadn't had enough testing cycles as KubeCon and all the things, holidays, came in between. And the 1.9 cycle was short. So we just stayed in alpha and we'll graduate to beta the next cycle. But, just flip the switch. But what should be debated here is, should it even be the default? Because do we want to ship instructions of how to set up AJ, or maybe provide more kubeadm face command? Let's say we have 3 extra kubeadm face commands that make it way easier for you to create an AJ cluster. Now you only have to run 4 commands. But they don't ship with the init and join thing. That might also be an option. And so what we discussed was basically we want to go to GA as soon as possible in the next year, to unblock people that we met during KubeCon that said, oh, I think kubeadm is great, it fits what I'm trying to do exactly, but I can't use it in my company because it says beta. And that is my company's policy is XYZ, and well, I can't. So that is going to be the most important thing. Then shipping something that would be inspired by Swarm with init and join for masters as well is something that we should take up to debate. Is that something with Kubernetes architecture that is actually achievable? So I did an interview with the new stack during KubeCon, and we talked about this. There are so many aspects of a Kubernetes clusters that has to be AJ. It's not just multi-master, although most people tend to say that if I had 3 masters, then my whole cluster is like AJ. But for example, we have a lot of add-ons that then get deployed on the cluster. We have one funny thing is this: all the workloads in the cluster refer to the Kubernetes service VIP, and by default, the masters aren't removed there. So if you lose a master, a lot of traffic will go into black hole. That is something Ryan have been kind enough to help fix, and is something we're going to graduate to beta in 1.10. All these things. So we should at least start thinking about it, how far we want to go with the self-hosting and AJ stuff out of the box in kubeadm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it would be useful to write or maybe rewrite like a kubeadm scope document about what we are building and sort of where it ends. Because I think, I've seen a lot of, email threads and doc comments basically saying, there's no way you can declare it GA until it has HA for various reasons. And we need to, if we don't agree with that sentiment, we need to write it down and have a good rationale for that. So that kind of dovetails, and the next one was HA, which I think Lucas covered pretty well there. It's not in 1.9. We're still sort of in the design phase for that. After that was switched to using dynamic kubelet configuration. I think from our side, we did everything. It didn't make it out of alpha in Kubernetes itself, and so we can't turn it on by default because it's not going to be available in all clusters.
Yeah, I mean, Peter did a great job at implementing this, so we did as much as we could here, which was great, and it only needs a few small touches for 1.10, and we also need to help Mike Torfin get the thing to beta, like in the kubelet and API server.
Yes. Next was getting the kubeadm sort of phases API out of alpha or into a new rev in alpha, and so that didn't make it in 1.9. Next was the cluster API, an alpha version of that. We have an alpha version of that. That's what we presented at KubeCon. I do want to get the comments on the PRs resolved and get the sort of official PRs merged so we can move forward. And we talked last week, one of the Lutzy guys was going to start working on next iteration of the API using machine sets on top of machines. So we should expect that pretty soon. Next was improving test coverage for kubeadm. So in particular, people have requested in the past that we test with 2 or more CNI providers, which I believe we're now doing, isn't that right?
Yeah, the Calico one is failing because I think the manifest is somehow wrong or whatever. I need to hunt those guys down and see what's up. Flannel has been passing all last cycle at least. So yeah, progress there indeed.
Cool. I don't think we did any work on adding other specific ED tests, as were mentioned here. But Lee mentioned at the beginning of the call before you joined, Lucas, that as he was working on the SED stuff, he wanted to write ED tests for that. So I think as we do sort of new features in kubeadm, we should get either new unit integration or ED tests as a side effect of having new features be added.
Yeah, and also the unit test coverage has been improved over the course of the cycle. Was something, yeah. So we talked about in the conformance meeting that something that kind of belongs to C+ Lifecycle is to write some kind of IDE test that make sure the kubelet API point is secured, for example. That is kind of trivial to write because you can proxy through the API server or get that information from the API server and just curl. But it would be crucial to have the signal that when you're running Sonoboy or whatever to conformance test, you can tell, is my cluster completely insecure or not? And we should like add these kinds of tests automatically to kubeadm just to prove that we have this enabled.
Yeah, there's some great talks about Kubernetes security at KubeCon, and there's also a project called KubeBench, which attempts to go through and sort of audit clusters and tell if they're secure. I don't know if there's a way we could integrate some of those checks into Sonobuoy as well and say like you're conformant and secure, which would be nice. Or make part of conformance is that you're like meets a minimum bar of security. I think it's implemented differently from Sonobuoy. Joe, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think there is an adapter to run the KubeBench stuff under Sonobuoy. I think in terms of conformance, I think it makes sense to think about, do we want to actually be able to attest to this? But there are definitely different views in terms of how secure clusters need to be, and it's environment specific. And, so it's not as clear a picture as I think it probably should be in terms of being able to say that. And there's a lot of history there too. And
which SIG is that debate happening in, Joe?
So what should be conformant and what should not be?
Well, specifically the question of whether like an insecure cluster should be considered conformant, because I would argue it should not be.
Yeah, no, I it's a very good discussion to have. I don't think we've had it yet. It would be SIG architecture owns the definition of what conformant is.
Yeah. Also, the CNCF working group related to Kubernetes conformance talks about it, but I don't know. I wouldn't say they own it.
Yeah, the rubber meets the road in SIG architecture for that stuff.
All right, so next was improving the kubeadmin release process. I'm not sure, I think Tim had proposed some changes here to make it better. I know that as part of building a release, the release team is supposed to be building kubeadmin packages. Although I think for 1.9, Jacob just went ahead and built those for expediency's sake, since we were doing it on a Friday afternoon. But I do believe that there is an improvement in the fact that we're not reliant on SIG cluster lifecycle to build those as part of a Kubernetes release. But I think Tim had some more specific improvements that he wanted to do. Jacob did go back and rebuild all of our packages to fix our CNI dependencies. So I guess we could consider that an improvement. Before we were saying CNI version 0.5.1 or greater, but if you actually run 6 on old version of Kubernetes, it doesn't work. And so he bumped the package version and made it an equals instead of a less than or equals, which required rebuilding and repushing something like 300 packages before we cut 1.9.
So the reason we're blocked here, or we didn't make any progress, is that we're basically waiting for Basil to, come and save us. I don't know. The thing we have now is some homegrown scripts, and we want to standardize that with Basil, and that will also make it much easier to do like check out a commit, run Basil build. It will give you binaries. It will give you debs, probably Docker images too. And then you could push that to whatever GCS or cloud storage, or you could have it locally and just run IDE tests. So that is, and as Fabrizio also pointed out, it's something that a lot of contributors struggle with because it's not at all obvious. It's very, very wacky. So yeah, we're waiting for Basil to add multi-arch support. I think it's at head there since last time I was talking to Jeff. But we're still waiting for Kubernetes to adopt such a released version for things for Bazel, and yeah.
Cool. So next was better documentation, which Fabrizio was driving, and I believe landed, unless anyone wants to correct me.
Yep. Thanks for the great work. That's really awesome to see. Yeah, I went through all of the kubeadm documentation and tried to, for example, some of the feedback that I got was there isn't even a definition on what kubeadm is in our docs. And that is true, because we've updated the doc gradually, but not like seeing to the full picture. And there was a lot of text that was written in 1.4 that was still present. So, yeah. Yeah, and no component config. Or we did make some progress. For example, although the kubelet component configuration didn't make beta, there were some significant progress in terms of reshuffling things internally to make it even possible. The same thing have been done for the proxy and the kube scheduler. So we're nearly good to go there. There is some open debate still, like where should we have some common structs that are shared between all component configurations and such, but yeah, still waiting. Well, need to be escalated as well, as Robert wrote here.
Yeah, we found out at KubeCon that SIG API machinery has no intention of doing this anytime soon for the API server. So if we want to make that part of the cluster API or part of the kubeadmin API, then we need to get SIG architecture to tell them that they have to do it. So we should think about escalating, and if we believe it's important, and come with a strong rationale of why it's more important than the other things on their backlog. I do think the list that we have here is too long. We did go through and sort of audit the list of things that we actually need to move to component config, and it's shorter than this, and there are not too many remaining. So the API is a big one.
Yeah, and also the control manager might be achievable with the cloud provider refactoring effort, as our cloud controller manager needs to have component config. We're basically making that a beta requirement in order for us to push harder on the core controller manager as well. And also it will help a lot when running your other 3 cloud providers.
All right, so we're just about out of time. So I think we'll just keep the rest of the things in the doc because they're all lower priority and probably aren't worth talking about. And then I'm punting the last agenda item to next time. And speaking of next time, I don't know if anybody is planning on being here next week. I'm certainly not going to be here next week. So I'm going to propose we cancel that meeting and meet again on January 2nd.
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent.
And yeah, in the meantime, as I shared with the mailing list, I'm working on a roadmap. Got some great feedback already. Will enhance. Feel free to just go ahead and add stuff that you want to see or ask for clarifications when needed. And then we'll use this doc and probably check it in somewhere to have a good overall, like this is the direction we're going, that we could use for then planning for individual milestones.
Great. Thanks, Lucas. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and we'll see everybody again in 2 weeks. Have a great holiday break.
Thank you.